Hello and welcome to Beyond Top 10 Tennis. My name is Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge and I'm your host. I am the author of 11 books. I've been a CEO for 12 years. I am the founder of a startup set on data privacy. I am an elite performance coach of over 18 years, having worked with wonderful, incredible athletes throughout Europe, the United States, through to Australia. I am most specifically, and I guess this is, the pretense behind the name, the world's leading scientist on coach and athlete performance, specifically in tennis. And what that really breaks down to is that I am the incredibly proud scientist behind uncovering a landmark first for the sporting world, specifically how to develop a top 10 ranking. This is something that we never even thought was possible. We didn't even set out to have this type of result. So it is, from a coaching and playing standpoint, is phenomenal. And there's so many offshoots there, and it's just incredibly rewarding to be able to share with all of you out there that we know what it takes now, specifically down to that end point, which is that top 10 ranking, of really how to get there. I'm behind such theories as the optimal performance theory, the V by Dr. B, to the rule of transference. I've coined such terms of the barrier breaker through to the golden rule. A lot of my work also revolves around mitigating injury, looking at those biomechanics to those technical parameters to really set up those foundations to becoming that elite athlete, specifically that professional tennis player, and that journey towards the top 10. As has become custom in each episode, we'll look at one of my books. Specifically, we've been focusing on the secrets to optimal performance success, and then we're going to break it down, share additional insights, and just get down to the nitty-gritty and share, that those additional keys that when you're reading and if you are following along, to really grab a hold of and apply in your training practices. Get ready. This topic today it's so often overlooked, but it's just equally just as rewarding, and I really hope you enjoy it and have a lot of positive takeaways today. Today's episode is based on rated progress is timing everything, the sister factor. Now, if you want to follow along, we're on page 83 of The Secrets to Optimal Performance Success, a comprehensive discussion on developing elite coaches and players. Now, if you've been listening from the very beginning, thank you so much for bearing with us. Your feedback is incredibly appreciated. Now, if you do have feedback, please don't be shy and send it through. Today's topic, it's out of the same book that it's just so loaded, filled with just incredibly wonderful insights, and it really sets the baseline, a healthy foundation, whether you're that 5-year-old learning, the 10-year-old, 15-year-old, or even that 25-year-old, to just recap and refresh on really just simplified insights on what it really takes to build that whole athlete from the beginning. And irrespective of what age you're at, there are always progressions. Now, today's topic, it's so, it's fun, because what we say or mean by the sister factor is that tennis is one sport, but you can learn so much from playing other sports, which means you could be swimming, for example, and there are wonderful health benefits there, specifically for your breathing. One of, I think, the favorite crossover sports for tennis players is commonly soccer, and I wish I saw more athletes and players using that in their training load. Obviously, if you're not in Australia, it's going to be football for you. And I'll stick with the term soccer only because it's just, I am in Australia and it's just commonly referred to. And I think the key here is that your footwork skills they're phenomenal, and what it takes to constantly move around the field, it's synonymous to the tennis court. There's so many wonderful crossovers, not to mention, I guess, from a training load perspective. I guarantee you, each and every sport out there has some type of benefit. Irrespective of what it is, there is that sister factor, even if it is on an incredibly small scale. At the end of the day, when you actually learn a new skill, not only are you challenging yourself and your coordination, you're typically also challenging your anticipation. So those two, I guess, elements there, coordination and anticipation, the more you can intrinsically challenge them and then in turn condition them, has a really rewarding effect in your primary sport. So if we use primary sport as tennis, your sister sports that you integrate within your conditioning can have immense benefits. All right, so as I said, we're on page 83, so let's dive in. On a regular basis throughout my coaching career, I have come across parents who are genuinely worried that time is running out. This running out has to do with whether or not their son or daughter is developing fast enough, improving fast enough, and performing good enough. These parents, more often than not, are the ones who genuinely have invested big dollars into their child's sport of choice, being hopeful of a long-term financial reward. This is a big one. I think on that financial element, it's just so incredibly fundamental, because I think a lot of players and athletes miss out, which normally I'd leave this till later, but that's why AMA International was built, set on the pretense of accessibility and affordability. Because again, I was one of those athletes, granted a long time ago now, which is a bit sad to say, that the access was kind of there, but it wasn't, because affordability is such a huge factor. And you have, over a 10-year pathway, the average really good elite academy we're talking is roughly, if we look at in Australian dollars, at $1,500 a week, that's over $600,000 throughout that 10-year time frame, which is incredible. If you want a specific breakdown, head on over to AMA and look at the long game, where we break all of those, I guess, numbers down. But most specifically, all of the work is designed around making your training load, the specifics of what it really takes to develop a top 10 ranking, not only accessible, but affordable. And if you're listening to this, the best part is that right now you have access to the best coach in the world. And this is going to be disputed no matter where you look. 99% of the time by male coaches. And the best part is that the data's there. Obviously, the 11 books are there. And that I've really worked so hard to look, I want to use a Taylor Swift analogy here, which is very ironic and funny, because we can look at how different genders are treated, irrespective of their success. And no, I never thought I would actually put myself, I guess, in that boat. Though I guess we're talking about, if you've done that hard work and you are exceptional at what you do, then you stand up and you take a bow. And look, I'll take a bow for myself, though that's not what this is about. It's about saying that the work is there, and I'm so proud and privileged also to have worked so hard to be able to say that I am the world's leading authority when it comes to developing a top 10 ranking. And the best part about that is that the data's there, the science is there. And on the flip side, unfortunately, most coaches, if they have not been, I guess, in that academic lane or laneway, that they're not familiar with the depth and breadth of knowledge required to undertake this. And it's no mean task. So I guess I'm saying that to, look, the financial implications, they're incredibly significant, irrespective of where you go, and also depending what sport you play. Tennis is definitely up there. Though to cut costs, it's so important. It's one of my own core values that has been integrated within AMA International, is to ensure it's there. And that means irrespective of where you are based in the world, we are so mindful of that to make sure you do have access at one point or another. There are obviously introductory points and there are higher points, but they are all accessible and affordable, especially if you're considering working at one of those academies specifically, but more so working your training load into one of those academies, and you are also reliant on one of those. There are so many sister factors involved there, though let's bring it back to, I guess, the fast enough or good enough analogy, where it's so critical to clarify this, because more often than not, a lot of parents and or guardians out there are worried that, you know, their 10-year-old isn't good enough for a 10-year-old, that their 15-year-old's not good enough for that 15-year-old. It's so on and so forth, and it's so unfair because each individual develops at a different rate, and that's obviously what comes back to that rate of progress. Everyone is different and everyone will develop differently. And that is why, look, we are so fortunate to see some of the best players in the world right now actually at a very young age. And this has not happened at least for the last 10 years, typically. Just on a ballpark average. Typically, historically, we've seen in the last decade older Grand Slam champions. And when we say older, we're looking at that 25 plus. And it's also towards late 20s, early 30s, and we've been so privileged to see that rate of progress ends up peaking later. And that is typically incredibly healthy, but it's a wonderful rate of progress. Oftentimes you see athletes or players peaking very early. That's late teens, early 20s, which on one hand is phenomenal. But the risk there is that if it is not managed over time, they will obviously no longer peak when they're 28, 29. So it's a question of how long they can hold onto that load and that level of play. Some, they are going to do it. But let's look at the top 10 players right now and where they are in 10 years. 50% of them, there's a very good chance, will no longer be playing. The younger ones though, there's probably only going to be 10 to 20% maximum that are going to hold onto the top 10 positioning, which is so, I guess, look, it's very interesting and rewarding on both ends, because it broadens, I think, the spectrum of understanding of where you're at, and if you need to crack the top 10 as a 20-year-old. If you can't, that is absolutely phenomenal, and you should be so incredibly proud of yourself. Though if you are that 18, 19-year-old sitting at 500 in the world, it's okay. Because give yourself another 2 to 3 years and you'll be in the top 100. And another 2 to 3 years, again, if you refer to the long game, you're going to be verging on the top 50. And by this time, you're about 23, which is setting you up for your prime. So by the time you're around that 27, you're embarking on the top 10, and your ability to continue that rate of progress and sustain that level of play is incredibly high. There is, however, that room for that 10 to 20% if their conditioning is maintained. Of course, they're going to stay there. And I think that is often mistaken for the hard work not being put in to begin with. If the right foundations are put in place from those early years, you are incredibly more likely to not only succeed, but reach that peak ranking phase earlier on in your career and have the capacity to sustain it, so maintain that, if obviously the right factors are in place, which obviously is directly correlated with access to the 7 keys, but also that healthy coach-athlete relationship and the upkeep of knowledge. That's so fundamental. All right, back to it. Unfortunately, this long-term financial reward does not always transpire, nor does the child continue to play their sport of choice as time progresses. That's a big one. And it really touches on what we've just spoken about. Though, for the parents out there, let's be mindful of the financial, implications here. There is no guarantee. Absolutely no guarantee that 500 to 600,000 over that 10 years is going to end up with a top 100 ranking. The likelihood of that, it's there, but it's often less than 10%. The best part about AMA is that when you put that work in and you have access to those 7 keys, typically the ratio is more than 10%, which is incredibly exciting. And we've been able to see this firsthand. One of the best recaps is that before Swiatek won her maiden Grand Slam, she was flagged as a future top 10 player. Most recently, Mikova reached Roland Garros finals, and she was also flagged 2 years ago to enter the top 10. And now she is poised. The rankings that are coming out, she's going to be sitting very close, if not inside. It's so rewarding and exciting when you're able to integrate not only the data and the science, but the practical, implications there. But again, it's so important to remember that each athlete is different. And that is probably the biggest concern when you're working with and or at an academy. You want to be mindful that you are being treated as that individual with your own playing style and your own level of understanding. And I say that with the best intentions, because everyone is going to understand in a different way, shape or form. Some very closely, others they're on a different page, and that's totally okay. It's about having, whatever you're learning or being where you're focusing on, for it to be accommodated to you, and that is so integral. Right. This commitment is a natural progression to weave out those that aren't as dedicated and determined as the top crop and continues to show. The financial reward is not the responsibility of the player if they are still a part of this top crop. There are evident sister factors that influence player performances and ultimately the level and form of success that eventuates before a player hangs up their boots or rackets. And time is not of the essence. And I think this is so important. And I've shared in previous episodes how this also has affected me in the past personally, is that even if you are one of those best players as a junior, and I'll use junior as in like 18 and under, just as a reference point, that if you're not at a peak and if you're not heading towards, I guess, the top 500 at that time, too often than not, you're written off, which is just drastically unfair. Because we know that you could be that 15-year-old, 18-year-old. You really have all those tools that you're fine-tuning, and you just have that knowledge gap. You're just not aware of the 7 keys, and you do not have that mutually, I guess, conducive coach-athlete relationship. But once you do have that, the rewards are incredible. The two of the best players in the world, and I'll say Alcaraz and Swiatek as a reference point, they both just whoosh, inside the top 100 to the top 50 to the top 10, literally in a matter of 2 to 3 years maximum. I think one or the other was even sooner. And that just goes to show, when you really find your mark and your rhythm and you get a hold of that knowledge and you have that wonderful coach-athlete relationship working for you and with you, it doesn't matter if you're 500 in the world or 800 in the world, you're going to be ascending. And we know as well. You could be 200 in the world, 50 in the world, but if you do not have that conducive coach-athlete relationship or access to the 7 keys, and you are not implementing these practices or incorporating them into your training load and performances, you're going to stay there. As the data tells us. And historically speaking, you're going to stay around that top 50 and or that top 200, and you're not going to move. And it's so sad that we see players, professional players that work so hard. And look, if you're in the top 100, you are playing at an exceptional level. So you should be so proud of yourself. But I know as well as you know that you want to progress further in those Grand Slams, and you want that ranking to ascend closer towards the top 20 and hopefully one day the top 10. But if you do not have access to those tools, you hover. You hover typically around a similar ranking range for a number of years. And that's okay, because there is a 99% of players, that's what happens. The 1% ascend steadily. They're very mindful of that rate of progress and also of that coach-athlete relationship, and they're continuously working to fine-tune, I guess, not only that level of that rate of progress, but they're so mindful of the sister factors. And look, earlier on, the sister factors, we look at them as complementing, I guess, sports that you integrate into your training load. Though the other side of the sister factor that I'm sure you're clued onto by now is the financial side, and those implications of whether you're good enough at that level of play that you're at, and time as one of those contributing factors that is so often mistaken for those end results. Here we go. Time can be trivial. In sports coaching, regardless of the sport, time is always of concern as to whether or not a parent can continue to finance their child's sporting pursuits prior to gaining a scholarship or sponsorship, or most frequently, whether or not the player or athlete has passed the age of performance success. The latter is of focus due to financial commitments, separate to each family, each scenario, and each sporting pursuit. And this is, again, incredibly heartbreaking, though I understand it completely. Because you know what? I was one of those athletes that got so lucky and I got that scholarship. And yes, I ended up playing in the NCAA. And as that athlete, I thought, look, this can finance my training load and I'm really going to get out of it what I want to before I head on tour. Now, this obviously has, I guess, a flip side as well. So we're not going to dive into that. And obviously there are academies around the world that also offer those scholarships to federations, etc. And in previous episodes, we've touched on, I guess, that negative side associated, or the connotations associated with partnering with a federation, etc. However, there are positives there as well. Same goes for the academies. In the past, I've been so lucky to sponsor athletes as well. So the coaches are out there and they are in a position to do that. You just need to find them, and obviously to make sure they have a hold of that knowledge and the 7 keys, etc. But I think the biggest factor here is being mindful of those dollars running out. So if you're looking at the long game, you could be that 12-year-old and you go, where's that 10-year pathway and that $500,000, $600,000 going? Now, it's a discussion, obviously, for players to have with their parents and also coaches on how best to facilitate that, and or the academies. And especially to be mindful up front about the long-term value there. Obviously, if you're 12, 13, maybe you're going to stop at 16, 17. And unfortunately, 80%, if not more, drop off during those adolescent years for, look, a number of factors. And a lot of it's got to do with developing an injury and not having, I guess, injury prevention to mitigating or practices implemented into different training loads to, I guess, what we've touched on, modifications being made, but also it could just not having the right team there, that you unfortunately don't have the best coach, don't have the best team around you, and it's disheartening. And that breaks my heart because I know that you do have access to that. And look, we're here, though please don't be discouraged. Please don't give up if your heart really is in it, that you do have the capacity to peak if you're willing to put in that hard work. And I think that's what it also comes down to, is that you've been working so hard and that maybe you are that 15, 16-year-old and you decide that you really need to keep working more and more and you don't want to. And look, if that's your case, that's okay. You've just saved your parents an additional, $200,000-$300,000, and they'll thank you for it when they do the math later. But look, if you really are serious and that your heart is in it and you thrive off that training load and being challenged, that I'm here today to share with you, look, not only is it possible, and if you have the right tools, that's wonderful, but let's be mindful of that, because the long game, look, for that reference point, the financial implications, they just can't be ignored, and they are the silent sister factor to do with your rate of progress. And at AMA, it cuts it down to a third, depending on the different options available. And that's over 10 years. More often than not, you're going to enter within, I guess, those early years. So it could be that 7 to 8 years, maybe not 10. It really differs. If you are, however, entering an academy, you need to be prepared for that 5 to 10 years as a minimum. And that is if you're moving away from it when you obviously reach that 300, 200 in the world. And that is less than conducive, because you want to stay for the long game. You want to maintain that level of play. You want to maintain those results and access to that knowledge, but also to your peers and to learn from one another. And I think this is something that's too often overlooked. And we're going to finish on this because it's just so important, is that having access to fellow players who are on the journey with you. They are either current or looking to become professional athletes, players, and there's so much knowledge and experience to gain there. Same goes with different coaches, is that sure, you have some that are just exclusive and it's hush-hush, but if you have the right team around you, it is incredibly beneficial, especially to exchange between athlete to athlete, player to player on what they're doing and what's working for them. Because that means they're going to walk away and question whether or not their coach is implementing similar practices. And if they want it, to open up that dialogue with their coach. If they don't want it, that's okay. But it's also keeping one another accountable to how that coach-athlete relationship is. And if they want to just increase that dynamic by adding those, different facets to their training load. Because look, that 15, 16, 17-year-old, they don't have all the answers and you're not expected to. But the more you share and discuss between each other, the more, in a way, you're patting each other on the back and you're giving one another a helping hand to keep their coaches accountable and keep them up to speed with best practices, which is just so important. And that's one of the fundamental parts at AM8, is that we have those groups, that group access for you to be a part of and engage with fellow players just to keep ahead of the pack, which is just so important. On that note, I think we're going to wrap up, because it's so integral to recall the sister factors of keep playing those other sports and implementing them, integrating them into your current training loads. And irrespective of what your sport of choice is, I encourage you to play those other sports. Obviously not every day or every week, that's not the point, but it's pulling different skills from that coordination to anticipation and acknowledging that crossover effect. It's so rewarding. But then also on the flip side, the sister factors that are involved around time and the financial, implications there, and how you can be incredibly mindful of that and better manage that, but also share additional insights with your peers, your parents to coaches, to really get your head around that long game. And if you are in it for that next 10 years plus, it's really something to start being mindful of. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's just a very interesting topic to dive into, whether it's from the sister sports to the sister factors that are involved in your rate of progress, from time to those financial implications. It's so incredibly important to begin having those conversations, even if they are just very brief, and or acknowledging that it's something there to be discussed, even if it's every quarter to every 6 months, between child, parent, the planning there, and also parent to coach, just to stay ahead of the game and to just give yourself a better understanding of what's involved and what you're prepared to, I guess, put out to begin with, and look at, I guess, that 5 to 10 year plan. If you'd like to get a copy of The Secrets to Optimal Performance Success, please head on over to AM8 International. That's am8international.com. But specifically for today's episode, take a peek at the long game. That's one of the tabs there, and click on it, and it will really break down everything there. It's so important. And also, take a peek at the gold to premium subscriptions and what they can offer you. It's so rewarding from that perspective. And again, we're always open to feedback and those additional insights, keep them coming. If you'd like to, you've got any feedback from today's episode, leave those comments and questions on AM8 or head on over to Topic Thread. That's topicthread.com, and it's the only social network that I'm on. If you'd like to, something different, my fictional release can be found at Pink Octopus Books, and I will leave all the links in the bio, in the show notes, as has become custom. And yes, if you've enjoyed today's episode, I really hope you have, please subscribe, follow, like, share, all of the above would be phenomenal. Look, on that note, I'll leave it with you. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful. I am your host, Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge, and this is Beyond Top 10 Tennis, and I'll see you next time.